Welcome back to the BTN TV studio. My name's Andy Hoskins and I'm editor of BTN Europe. Joining me now we have Amy Taylor from SAP Concur. Amy, Senior Director Global Product Strategy. Thanks for joining us here. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you. You've Concur have conducted some research recently, a couple of big surveys about the return of travel and the trends that we're seeing. Do you want to give us the sort of high-level overview of what came out of those surveys?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that I find really optimistic is that from an international standpoint, travel is back to about 61% of the volumes that it was pre-pandemic. And from a domestic standpoint, it's over 80%. So that was one of the key findings there. The other thing is that as people are coming back, they really want to travel more sustainably.
Yeah.
And people are thinking about travel in quite a different way. Travel is also falling to fewer people within an organisation, so a more travel on fewer shoulders approach.
Yeah, so a lack of resources, is that?
I don't know about a lack of resources necessarily, but I think people are choosing whether or not they wish to travel. So during the pandemic, we really saw employers encouraging employees to think about travel as more of an optional rather than mandatory part of their role, and empowering them to make the decision as to whether or not they were comfortable to travel. And now we're starting to see some of the decision-making process around that ebb into other areas. So COVID is still very much at the forefront of a lot of travellers' minds, but also people are thinking about their own personal well-being, with 1 in 4 willing to decline a trip if they're feeling burnt out, and a similar number willing to decline a trip if it's using non-sustainable modes of transport.
Yeah, so sustainability and well-being have really sort of come to the fore.
Absolutely.
And actually it was interesting, yesterday I was moderating a session, we had some travel buyers on the panel who said that there was still a lot of reluctance to travel amongst travellers from a COVID point of view, as which kind of feeds into that well-being thing. And that their concerns are being taken more seriously than perhaps they once were.
Yeah, I think in terms of concerns, COVID is one. Rising costs and inflation is another that we see at the forefront of people's minds. And also the conflict as well that's going on in Ukraine is figuring in people's thinking. But even with that, from a UK perspective, the results, we had about 400 business travellers submit. They are very willing to continue to travel, 99% willing to travel again over the next 12 months. So the appetite's there, I think.
Yeah, it's just an incredibly complex landscape still, isn't it? And obviously we've got some, call them teething problems, in the hope that they'll go away. And did you have any insight into the sort of traditional autumn business travel peak? Is that looking good?
Well, we've certainly seen an upward trajectory since the Omicron wave started to subside, really since January. And I think part of that as well, and this was reflected in the survey, is that organisations are starting to relax some of their pre-trip approval processes, and that's allowing the travel where that pent-up demand exists really to flow through.
Yeah,
so
I mean that's an interesting point, that approvals is sort of back to a lower level. And again, someone was talking about this yesterday, and because that can slow down the booking process, which can also make a big difference to cost at the moment as well, because fares can change within just a few days for moving upwards.
Fares can move in absolutely both directions, and airlines are becoming far more sophisticated with their inventory management and fare class rulings, etc. Yeah.
So sustainability, let's focus in on that for a moment. How are companies approaching that now? Is it about getting hold of that data, looking at better quality data pre-trip and post-trip, and then what do you do with that? Because there's beginning to be a little bit of scepticism around offsetting and even SAF. I mean, SAF is a big topic at the moment. We're seeing a lot of airlines investing in that. What's your take on that?
Well, when we look at our customer base, we really see a process emerging around sustainability within organisations that will be familiar to a lot of the travel managers in our industry, because it's a process that we've used for a very long time to drive change, and we know the travel industry experiences a lot of change. And that process is really, as you say, to get hold of the data, to really measure what you're doing, to create benchmarks. And also that data will be able to help you identify initiatives that are going to have the biggest impact, because no two programs are the same. If you had to pick, say, the top 3 things you wanted to do to make the biggest impact, your data will help you decide what those are.
Yeah.
And then utilize that data and communicate to stakeholders, whether that's people within your own organization or indeed supplier partners you may have, before then being able to influence the travelers within your organization. So measure, communicate and influence is the process we're seeing.
Yeah, we've got this sort of dichotomy where the only rapid way to cut emissions is not to travel, but at the same time we're all in the industry and we're hoping for its recovery, aren't we?
I think there's a balance to be struck, and there are ways in which you can still travel and reduce your footprint at the same time.
Yeah.
So a survey we ran a couple of years ago, the number one thing we saw travel managers doing in terms of reducing emissions was to switch from plane to train where that was feasible. But the reporting has got ever more sophisticated. So SAP Concur partnered with Thrust Carbon earlier this year. And one of the things our mutual customers can benefit from is utilising the Concur data that exists within the ecosystem and really gaining that pinpoint visibility into particular shifts they can make in policy to drive change. Now that might be perhaps shifting away from 3 repeat visits in a certain period of time and perhaps staying longer and reducing your emissions in that way, because the majority of emissions very often are on the airfare. You mentioned sustainable aviation fuel, and there are lots of customers looking into that rather than in the lodging and hotel provision.
Yeah, I guess there's a real balance, isn't there, between there's so many different facets to business travel, but how about indirect versus direct flights? Because some companies have often promoted indirect when it's not too inconvenient because of the price differential, but the sustainability aspect is not as good as a direct flight. So have you observed any changes there?
Well, that's really interesting, because I thought exactly the same thing. Direct is always better than indirect from an emission standpoint. But something I learned earlier this year is that actually there are some itineraries where it's more sustainable to take an indirect service.
Okay.
So an example of that would be ultra long haul flights. It's almost always better from an emission standpoint to change planes, and the reason for that is the weight of the fuel for those long journeys means that you have to carry more fuel to carry the fuel.
Yeah.
And so this is what I mean by getting hold of the data, really examining your program to be able to make the right decisions.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I've learned something there. Thank you, thank you very much. Has the speed of recovery taken Concur by surprise? Is the view that this is potentially we're just burning through some pent-up demand?
I think we were very much encouraged by the numbers that we've seen, because we're technology-based organisation rather than heavily on the service side, which some of our partners within the travel industry are.
Yeah.
It's been less of an impact for us than it has been for some of our other partners, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, and yesterday you were on a panel about managing heavily reduced travel programs.
That's
is that right?
Yes.
I couldn't make that one for whatever reason. But what was the view there? Because a lot of people are now finding that their travel programs aren't quite as reduced as they thought they might be.
Well, one of the things that we discussed was it depends how you measure it. Because if you're measuring by transactions or if you're measuring by spend, particularly with the inflationary pressures we've got at the moment, you're going to end up with slightly different numbers. So whether companies are above 2019 spend, they may well reach that by the end of the year, but whether that's then reflected in their transaction volumes is still up for debate.
Yeah, okay, well, we'll look out for that one. And then just lastly, what can we look out for from Concur this year in terms of investment or upcoming product developments?
Well, we're actually publishing our next product roadmap tomorrow, so our customers will be able to see what's coming next. But we're significantly investing in the travel landscape, and sustainability is a core pillar of that. Really, for us, we think about the ecosystem that we play in and giving our travellers and our customers choice.
Okay, brilliant. Well, I look forward to having a look at that roadmap then. Amy, thank you very much for joining us, and I wish you all the best for the rest of the rest of the year.
Thank you very much.
We'll catch up again next year and see how it went.
Excellent.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that's back to the show floor.